啊，兄弟啊，这个危险了！
往后面的车去稳住哦，不要过来哦。
It was just past midnight in Rongjiang County, Guizhou Province. Most people were already asleep. The rain had been falling steadily for days, but that night it turned relentless. At 12:48 a.m., sirens began wailing through the valley. Local authorities had just issued an emergency evacuation notice. The riverbanks had collapsed in 3 locations upstream. A wall of muddy water was coming fast.
We grabbed the kids, our phones, and one bag. We didn't even have time to put on shoes,
said Zhang Wei, a father of 2 who lives near the Laba River. By 1:20 a.m., the water had reached knee-height in his home. Just minutes later, it swept through his neighborhood, submerging everything in chest-high floodwaters. This was not a one-off. That same night, nearly 20,000 people across 3 provinces, Guizhou, Hunan, and Guangxi, were forced to evacuate within hours. What began as a series of scattered thunderstorms escalated into one of the most destructive flood emergencies in recent Chinese memory. In cities like Zhaoqing, entire streets turned into rivers. In villages like Kongjiang, landslides blocked every exit road. And in places like Huaiji, southern Guangdong, helicopters had to airlift families stranded on rooftops. As of late June 2025, torrential rains have pummeled southern and central China for nearly 3 consecutive weeks. Entire regions have been transformed. Rivers turned violent, hills gave way, and urban centers submerged underwater. Let's look at the scale of this unfolding crisis. The worst affected areas include parts of Guizhou, Hunan, Guangxi, Jiangxi, Guangdong, and Anhui. In these regions, rainfall levels exceeded seasonal averages by 200 to 300%, overwhelming local infrastructure. In Guizhou Province, the counties of Kongjiang and Rongjiang were among the first to report riverbank failures. By June 14th, more than 80 villages in the Qiandongnan Miao and Dong Autonomous Prefecture had seen severe flooding. The Laba River, usually a calm flow between forested hills, rose to its highest recorded level since 1998, swelling 3.2 meters above warning levels. In Hunan, the Xiangjiang River overflowed its banks near the city of Hengyang. Local officials declared a Level 1 flood emergency on June 17th, forcing more than 95,000 people to evacuate overnight. Video footage showed entire apartment basements submerged and cars floating along streets like toys. Guangxi and Guangdong provinces, closer to the southern coast, also experienced heavy rainfall, driven by the remnants of Typhoon Wu-Tip, which made landfall near Vietnam but pushed moisture inland. In Huaiji County, more than 30,000 residents had to be evacuated as the Suijiang River burst its banks. China's National Meteorological Center issued multiple red alerts, the highest level warning, across 6 provinces. In many cases, these alerts came within hours of flash floods, leaving residents with little time to respond. On June 19th, the city of Zhaoqing in Guangdong was hit by nearly 350 millimeters, 13.7 inches of rain in 24 hours, one of the highest single-day totals recorded in over 2 decades. The city's drainage system, built to handle only 200 millimeters per day, collapsed under the pressure. Subways flooded, roads became rivers, and schools were shut down for an entire week. Satellite images from NASA and China's National Remote Sensing Center reveal a shocking transformation. Rivers like the Xijiang and Yuanjiang, which normally snake through farmland, have turned into muddy plains stretching kilometers wide. Floodwaters submerged nearly 700,000 hectares of cropland, particularly rice paddies in Anhui and Jiangxi. Dozens of power stations had to be shut down temporarily, disrupting energy supply to nearby industrial zones. The flood wasn't just water. In Guizhou's mountainous regions, continuous rainfall destabilized slopes, triggering more than 150 landslides. In one incident near Liping County, a landslide buried an entire stretch of provincial highway, isolating 6 villages for over 48 hours. In Jiangxi, authorities used dynamite to divert water from the overfilled Poyang Lake, preventing a dam collapse but flooding hundreds of hectares of farmland as a sacrifice. Meteorologists are already calling this China's worst June flood season since 1998, when more than 4,000 people died and 15 million were displaced. While loss of life is currently far lower in 2025, thanks to improved forecasting and early warning systems, the economic cost may surpass past disasters. Analysts estimate that direct economic losses have already exceeded $8 billion, with more than 300,000 buildings damaged or destroyed, and key logistics routes across southern China disrupted. The numbers are staggering: hundreds of thousands displaced, billions in damages. But behind every statistic is a story: a grandmother carrying her grandson through waist-deep water, a teenager wading through flooded streets to find mobile signal and call for help, families huddled on school gymnasium floors, staring silently at the rain that just won't stop. These are the human faces of the 2025 China floods. In the 3 weeks since the floods began, over 550,000 people have been relocated from their homes, many in the middle of the night. The scale of displacement has tested every level of local government, stretching emergency shelter capacity to its limits. In Gongjiang County, Guizhou, makeshift shelters were set up in school halls, government buildings, and even underground parking lots. Many evacuees had just minutes to leave their homes, carrying little more than an ID card and a phone. One evacuee, Li Hua, a 42-year-old mother of 3, told state television,
"We heard the alert and ran. The water was already coming into the living room. When we got outside, it was already up to our knees."
In Guangdong, residents like 74-year-old Huang Meishu were evacuated by boat from their second-floor windows after the first floor was fully submerged. While authorities moved quickly, conditions in some shelters have been difficult. Many sites lacked clean water, adequate food, or medical supplies in the early days. In Rongjiang, several children were treated for waterborne illnesses just 48 hours after arriving at a temporary shelter. Volunteers played a crucial role. Local youth groups, retired doctors, and even off-duty firefighters helped distribute supplies, cook food, and clean toilets. In the face of adversity, communities came together, but resources were stretched thin. There were also psychological scars. According to a counselor working in Hunan, children showed signs of shock, night terrors, and separation anxiety.
Some kids cry every time it rains.
One overlooked consequence of the flooding was communication breakdown. With power lines down and mobile towers submerged, entire districts lost connectivity. In Zhaoqing, thousands were unreachable for more than 18 hours. Panic spread across social media as families tried to contact loved ones. Some evacuees used WeChat SOS features to pin their last known location. In several cases, drone teams were dispatched based on coordinates shared by trapped residents. But not everyone was so lucky. In remote parts of Anhui, elderly villagers in highland areas went missing for days until helicopters spotted them waving from rooftops. The flood exposed gaps in China's disaster response for vulnerable populations. In Jiangxi, 2 nursing homes had to be evacuated when floodwaters rose unexpectedly overnight. Staff carried residents out on mattresses. In Hunan, rescue teams reported difficulties evacuating families with autistic or disabled children, who often resisted sudden relocation due to sensory overload or confusion. These moments, largely absent from official coverage, paint a complex picture. While disaster systems are improving, they still struggle when reality hits. As waters recede in some areas, emotional trauma lingers. For many, this is not the first flood, but the frequency and intensity are increasing. In Rongjiang, a woman said this was her 3rd flood in 5 years, and the worst by far. Many families, particularly in farming communities, now face weeks or months of instability. Fields are gone, equipment ruined, debts mounting. Mental health experts warn that China may be facing a slow-motion trauma epidemic as the country deals with more climate-related disasters in the years ahead. This chapter of the flood story isn't about rain or infrastructure, it's about people. And for hundreds of thousands, the struggle is just beginning. In the next chapter, we'll explore what's fueling these extreme weather events and why it seems like every summer now brings new chaos. The rain was extreme, but what truly turned it into a disaster was what happened next. When the first storm drains overflowed, when the levees cracked, when entire towns were cut off, it wasn't just the weather that failed. It was the system. Across China's flood-prone south, much of the water control infrastructure was designed for 20th century weather, not as 21st century extremes. Levees along rivers like the Xijiang and Suijiang were built in the 1980s and 90s, based on rainfall patterns that no longer apply. Today's storms are faster, more intense, and less predictable. In Guizhou, at least 37 small levees failed during the first 10 days of June. Many had never been reinforced or retrofitted. One collapsed just 200 meters from a newly developed residential complex. In Zhaoqing, an entire neighborhood was flooded when a pumping station, last upgraded in 2005, lost power and shut down. Landslides caused by continuous rainfall severed key provincial highways, especially in mountainous areas. Some villages were completely cut off for days, forcing emergency services to rely on helicopters and drones. One dramatic failure occurred in Liping County, where a bridge collapsed just minutes after authorities closed it to traffic. No casualties were reported, but the footage shocked the nation. Even in urban areas, infrastructure wasn't spared. In Hengyang, underground parking garages became flood traps, swallowing dozens of vehicles and straining emergency crews. Cut to security footage from inside a shopping mall. Water bursts through
命大啊，兄弟啊，这个危险啊！
往后面的车子稳住啊，不要过来哦。
车头一走到那里去了，感觉就下沉了一点，然后我就马上就踩刹车了嘛，踩了刹车之后，车子还是有点惯性嘛，它就往前走一点嘛。我靠，那个前面的桥梁全部塌下来了。
glass doors like a tidal wave, flooding escalators and storefronts within seconds. The video, captured inside, a mall quickly went viral on social media. Shoppers screamed and scrambled upstairs as water overtook the entire ground floor in under 2 minutes. Incidents like this highlight how modern urban infrastructure, often designed for convenience and aesthetics, can become deadly when weather exceeds its limits. Flooding didn't just damage homes, it hit industrial parks, power stations, and logistics hubs. In Hunan's Laodi City, a substation powering 14 factories was submerged, halting operations for a week. Similar outages were reported in Guangxi, where textile and electronics producers scrambled to salvage equipment. With supply chains already stretched by global trade tensions, this added disruption rippled through the economy. Some export contracts were delayed, leading to tensions with overseas buyers. In 2015, China launched the Sponge City Initiative, an ambitious plan to redesign urban centers with porous pavement, green roofs, and wetland buffers to absorb floodwater. While promising, implementation has been uneven. Pilot cities like Wuhan and Shenzhen have seen progress, but many second and third-tier cities lack funding, expertise, or political will. In Zhaoqing, which suffered severe flooding, Sponge City upgrades had been delayed 3 times due to budget issues. A planned floodwater retention basin was never built. Experts say the concept works, but only when fully committed and maintained. China has made big strides in early warning systems. Alerts are now delivered via mobile phone, TV, and even loudspeakers in rural villages. But in several provinces, residents said warnings came too late, or didn't come at all. In Kongjiang, villagers said they had just 20 minutes between alert and evacuation. Some places were still relying on human messengers or outdated sirens. And in low-income areas, phone reception was inconsistent. Real-time rainfall sensors and AI prediction models are expanding, but in 2025, coverage is still far from nationwide. Beyond infrastructure failure lies a deeper issue: urban overexpansion into flood-prone zones. Rapid real estate growth in smaller cities has often ignored hydrological maps. Apartment complexes have sprung up on former wetlands or floodplains, many without adequate drainage systems. In Guangdong, satellite images showed new construction right next to overflowing rivers. These choices amplify damage when floods arrive. Without stricter zoning laws and enforcement, the problem is likely to repeat. As China continues to modernize, its infrastructure faces a tough truth. Climate adaptation isn't just about building more, it's about building smarter. In the next chapter, we'll look at how the government and local communities are responding to these mounting challenges, and where help is still falling short. In times of disaster, government response can mean the difference between crisis and catastrophe. So, How did China's government at the local, provincial, and national levels respond to the 2025 floods? In several provinces, response was swift and organized. In Hunan, authorities deployed over 10,000 emergency workers within 48 hours after flood warnings. Rescue teams used amphibious vehicles and inflatable boats to evacuate residents from hard-hit areas like Hengyang and Shaoyang. The central government activated Level 1 emergency response mechanisms in 4 provinces, unlocking additional funding, military support, and coordination across ministries. In Guangxi, military helicopters airlifted nearly 600 people trapped in mountainous areas. Drones were used for surveillance and delivery of supplies to inaccessible zones. Analysts say that China's flood response shows clear improvements since 1998 and 2020, but deep structural weaknesses remain. Professor Wang Qiang, a disaster policy expert at Beijing Normal University, noted,
"The government's strength lies in rapid mobilization, but coordination, transparency, and equity are still lagging."
Rural areas consistently received less aid per capita than urban zones. Disabled residents and ethnic minorities were underrepresented in planning and response. A lack of standardized flood response protocols between provinces also hampered cross-regional collaboration. Long after the waters recede, the damage remains. For many, the flood was only the beginning of a much longer struggle, one that will test farmers, factory owners, families, and the very fabric of rural China. Agriculture was among the hardest hit sectors. According to the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, over 700,000 hectares of cropland were submerged across Anhui, Hunan, and Jiangxi provinces. Entire rice paddies were lost during the critical transplanting period. Corn, soybean, and vegetable fields were waterlogged or destroyed by landslides. Animal feed supplies were contaminated or washed away. For smallholder farmers, the damage is not just economic, it's existential. In rural Rongjiang, farmers estimate a 70 to 90% loss in income for the season. Insurance coverage remains low in many rural areas. Some farmers report no compensation, while others are still waiting on government inspectors to assess damages. In the industrial sector, the flood struck at a delicate time. With export competition rising and global supply chains under pressure, Chinese factories are already running tight margins. In Guangxi, textile factories had to shut down for 10 to 15 days due to power outages. In Hunan, electronic suppliers lost millions of yuan in machinery and raw materials. Business owners say repairing flooded facilities could take months, especially with regional shortages of construction workers and materials. The government has promised low-interest loans and tax breaks, but some smaller businesses say they can't survive even a 1-month delay. Beyond physical destruction lies a growing mental health crisis, especially among children, the elderly, and displaced rural populations. In shelters across Guizhou and Hunan, counselors report rising cases of anxiety, insomnia, and depression. Many residents experience traumatic evacuations, some in the middle of the night, others while witnessing homes or livestock swept away. For children especially, the repeated stress of climate-related disasters is leaving deep psychological scars. Rural China has an aging population. In many flooded villages, over 40% of residents are over the age of 60. These elderly communities are less mobile, more reliant on local clinics, and often have limited access to social safety nets. The flood destroyed health centers, contaminated drinking water, and left some residents stranded without medication for days. Experts warn that repeated climate shocks could accelerate rural decline, as younger generations abandon farming entirely. Nationwide, the flood's direct economic loss is estimated at over $9 billion and growing. Indirect losses, like missed harvests, delayed exports, factory closures, and rising food prices, are harder to quantify but equally damaging. In the medium term, southern China could see inflationary pressure on vegetables, pork, and grain products. These disruptions are also undermining local government budgets, which must now allocate emergency funds, reconstruction costs, and social support, often at the expense of development plans. Some heritage sites, such as ancient villages and bridges in Guizhou, were damaged or washed away. Festivals were canceled. Local traditions tied to river worship and seasonal planting were interrupted. In many communities, the flood didn't just erase property. It disrupted identity and rhythm. The long-term cost of the 2025 floods will not be measured only in yuan, but in lives disrupted, dreams deferred, and resilience tested. In the next chapter, we look forward, exploring what's being done to adapt, protect, and prevent the next disaster.